people feel like mental health is a luxury, right? Like, in that community, it's like you don't have time for anything to be wrong with you, right? And so you don't want to showcase any weaknesses. And I think in the sports world, a lot of mental health issues are masked by sports, just because the culture and the nature of sports to be tough, not to show weaknesses. And so I think a lot of times it gets overlooked, not really embraced a lot. As of late, that's changed. And I think so. And majority of guys come from challenging backgrounds as well. For myself, I came from an environment was pretty challenging, when you talk about financially, but then even a lot of my friends growing up, were in drugs and stealing cars and certain things. And then you put the weight of a community on your shoulders where it's like, oh man, you're the best thing to come out of here. Like, you're going to go on, you're going to make it to the league. You done did all these things, and you get that pressure that you don't even realize when you go into these universities where you were the best thing coming from where you came from, but so was every other guy, right?
Gotta weather the storm. One day we gon' get on. Talk to 'em. You ain't got a choice.
Welcome to Bailey Buck Unplugged, where we talk about sports, entertainment, and mental health in support of the Kennedy Kids Foundation. If you're struggling with mental health, we encourage you to speak up and get help. A great place to start is 988. That's the free crisis prevention lifeline. Or you can check out the resources tab at kennedykids.org. If you are in an absolute emergency, please dial 911. Either way, we want you to know that you are not alone and that you don't have to struggle, and speak up, get help. There are resources available to you, and we are here to support you. If you're new around here, I want to introduce you to our host. I am Misty Buck. I am an author and a mental health and performance coach. And my co-hosts are Robert Bailey. He is the president of Rosenhaus Sports, the president of Kennedy Kids Foundation. He's a two-time Super Bowl champion, two-time college national champion. He's an NFL record holder, and he's an ESPY winner. And we are also joined by Bailey Brooks Mashburn. She is a celebrity wedding and event planner, a former NFL cheerleader, and the executive director of the Kennedy Kids Foundation. Hey, and welcome to another episode of Bailey and Buck Unplugged. We have a super duper special guest for you guys today. We have Ronnie Brown. You guys know him. I know you do. He had this amazing NFL career, awesome college career. The man was drafted number 2. All right. He went on and did all kinds of amazing things. I have like a list of accolades from him, among them Pro Bowl. We have all rookie team PFWA, first team all SEC. I could go on and on and on for a very long time, but we want to hear from the man himself about all of the things that he has going on. And we're going to, of course, talk today about mental health from his perspective, too, as we always do. So, Ronnie, welcome to the show. We appreciate you.
Welcome, Ronnie. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome, Ronnie.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys sharing your platform with me.
Well, Ronnie, I want to be the first to ask you a question. I'm going to start this question on football since you were one of the greats. But most players that get drafted high are stars and are starters on their team. You're one of the few guys that did not. I think you were probably the highest drafted guy that actually wasn't the starter for his team and actually got drafted ahead of the starter that was on his team. During that time period, right? Because I know you wanted to be an NFL player during that time, everybody's goal. In college, did you really think, especially your last year, did you think that was going to be a problem for you in your career? Like, how did you accept that mentally going into that season, knowing that you're going to be sharing time and you're second to come off the bench?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's so many guys that I think, one, I grew up in a small environment in Northwest Georgia, right? So, being the player of the year in my conference and all of that stuff, the idea when you're being recruited is I'm going to go contribute right away, right? And even now, I think that's still the expectation. We didn't have transfer portal, so you had limited opportunities if you wanted to leave. But for me, I was like, okay, in recruiting and having those conversations, to be honest, Robert, like my first love was baseball. And so, I was thinking about going pro, but then I made a promise to my grandmother that I wanted to, go to school and get my degree. And that was one of the promises that she made me have with her. And so I was also scared and afraid of that process of going to the majors out of high school, not really having that support system in terms of knowing what to expect. I was the first one to go to school. And so, I chose the football route as a second option and actually committed to the University of Tennessee and ended up going to Auburn University because of baseball, right? Like I was being recruited to play baseball. And so I was going to do the 2-for-1. But then when I get there, of course, in recruiting, I ended up redshirting because we had Rudy Johnson, who they didn't tell me about, signing with Auburn as well out of junior college.
Good thing they didn't have the transfer portal back then.
Right. And so I ended up having a redshirt. Well, then I redshirt, and, I knew that was kind of the expectation back then. You don't usually play, especially in the SEC, your freshman year. Redshirting was normal. But then the next year I come back, Rudy goes, he leads the league and the SEC in rushing yards, and he goes and gets drafted to Cincinnati. Well, Cadillac Williams comes in, and he's Mr. Alabama. And so first day of spring practice, he's starting over me. And I've been here for a year. And so that kind of caught me off guard. And so I was a little frustrated and started deciding, do I want to go leave and play baseball? Because I had some options in the summer to get, they said they'd pay me like around $250,000 a summer to go play. But then by then I was like, man, I've been out of it for a year. I don't really know. And I was drafted by the Mariners. And so I said, all right, I'm going to stick it out. So he and I competed. We split time, a couple different coordinators, and a few years I wasn't playing much. And so I wasn't really sure about what was going to happen. I had graduated because I ended up redshirting. So my last year I ended up coming back because I didn't have anything to do but play football. And, my draft status at that point was 3rd round. And so I decided to come back for my senior year. We got a new coordinator, and I had more opportunities to showcase what I could do from, a versatility standpoint, being 235, 240 pounds at running back, catching the ball out of the backfield. Yeah, so that created opportunities to showcase different facets of my game. And I think that led to me getting drafted where I was, but it was a lot of ups and downs mentally. And my best friend now, who's a pastor here, like, we talk all the time. I'm like, if it wasn't for you, we had a punishment workout because we missed one of the freshman workouts. I was actually thinking about leaving. I was like, man, to this day, like, had I walked out of that building, my life could be totally different.
Yeah. Yeah. So you think that at that point, right, you were going through a mental health, and back then mental health wasn't really talked about much.
Yeah. Most people, especially culturally in the Black community, people feel like mental health is a luxury, right? Like, in that community, it's like, you don't have time for anything to be wrong with you, right? And so you don't want to showcase any weaknesses. And I think in the sports world, a lot of mental health issues are masked by sports, just because the culture and the nature of sports to be tough, not to show weaknesses. And so I think a lot of times it gets overlooked, not really embraced a lot. As of late, that's changed. And I think so. And majority of guys come from challenging backgrounds as well. For myself, I came from an environment was pretty challenging, when you talk about financially, but then even a lot of my friends growing up, were in drugs and stealing cars and certain things. And then you put the weight of a community on your shoulders where it's like, oh man, you're the best thing to come out of here. Like, you're going to go on, you're going to make it to the league. You done did all these things. And you get that pressure that you don't even realize when you go into these universities where you were the best thing coming from where you came from, but so was every other guy now, right? And so even success doesn't feel like success for a lot of guys. Like, you may be the first one in your family to go to college and graduate, but because you didn't make it to the league, you feel like a failure, right? And so being able to address that and go back to these communities where you're a lot better off, just not realizing it because their expectations for you was one thing, expectation of being drafted or getting drafted. And that only happens to 1%. So even though you have a degree and you get a great job, there's some sense of failure there in a lot of guys' minds. And I think it's really important to kind of combat that too for a lot of these young men and people and families not understanding the pressure that's being put on these guys, especially now with the financial aspect of it with NIL.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy. Misty wrote a book on on athletes and mental health. So, I want to give her the floor to talk about, especially what you talk about, just the culture of sports and how it masks the mental health. We're just trying to be aggressive, and that's what they tell us. Don't cry, don't complain, keep working hard. While guys are home crying, thinking about taking their lives.
Right.
So Missy, what do you think about that in terms of the way the sports mask guys, their mental health, it masks it, the coaches and the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Ronnie, I'm just interested to know, like, I guess I have so many questions for you, but we can start here along the mental health stuff, because you work in the financial space too now, right? As a wealth advisor, and there's a whole mental health component to that as well.
Yeah.
But I guess that adds to that pressure as well, right? What you were just saying, if you don't reach a certain point, you're a failure. It doesn't matter all of the other wins that you've had along the way. I've always found that so interesting with people, and I think high achievers, which most athletes are, especially at that level, that they tend to focus a lot on just the big wins. And so I'm always trying to be like, hey, like, why can't we celebrate some of the smaller wins? Why can't we focus on the journey? And it never seems to be enough. Right.
Yeah. No, I think it's a huge part of it. For me, looking back now that I'm a lot older, being able to enjoy those small successes, right? Like, a couple of my best friends growing up, a couple of them are doing life in prison. Unfortunately, a lot of my other friends that may have been just as talented, if not more, didn't make it, right? And so, you look at that's small successes for so many guys, right? And then to go get my college degree, to be the first to where, even with my kids, my expectation, I was surprised by getting a scholarship and going to college. My thought, my sophomore year, I'll just get a job. I'll work in hometown. I'll be a high school coach or something. And then now I'm in this position. So it wasn't even on my mind. Whereas now my kids, my wife and I both graduated from Auburn University. Their conversations at 12 and 9 are when we get to college, right? It's not if we're going to go, that becomes an expectation. So even those small wins and not realizing it in the moment, is really big. And I think for guys to learn how to embrace those things and not put the weight of the world or the community or the family on your shoulder saying, oh, you're going to be the first. Like, because I don't think people realize the pressure that comes with, I got to be the first, because I also have to I'm trying to be perfect, right? And that's something that I still deal with now. Like, not expecting perfection, but saying, oh, you're going to be the first. So me going into every environment thinking that I had to represent everybody in the community, I got to put that weight on my shoulders. I need to be successful, not for myself, but for everybody else. Like, I need to be perfect. I can't act up. I can't act out. I need to represent everything in every environment that I'm in. And so, even now there's a sense of perfection that I have that I think inhibits some actions, sometimes, or reactions that you just don't realize. And you try to embrace those things. But it gets a lot tougher in certain situations, I think, for some guys.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm wondering if it has to do also, in your opinion, with identity, right? So it's identity, it's values, it's, I am tying my self-worth and my identity to being here. And then once I'm here, now I have to climb this mountain. And then once I climb this mountain, now my expectation is here. Like, now I've won this many games. That's not enough. Now I have to do this. Right. And then after the fact, like you're saying, okay, now I walk into a room and I have to do this. It's like a constant elevation of continuing to keep that pressure of perfection. But I heard you even talk about identity a little bit on a podcast clip I saw on your Instagram about the transition, right? And how you had to take a hard look at that. So how do you think that identity piece for you now, I mean, I guess you can talk about the transition piece too, if you want, but how do you think that identity piece continues to tie into how you manage your mental wellness and this perfection ideals?
Yeah, I think in that transition for most athletes, that's the first time that you really get a chance to sit back and get a glimpse in the mirror of saying, okay, who am I really? Like, because the applause go away, that locker room goes away, that support system goes away, that, just having a routine and structure goes away. And it's hard to really recreate that. And so when you lose that all at once, and the majority of us don't get an opportunity to determine when we're going to retire, right? Like, it's usually a forced retirement. And the reality of it is when you get cut, for me, that first time, as much as I had done and much as I felt like I'd accomplished being an NFL player, it's still tough to deal with that because somebody's telling you, I don't think you're good enough now, right? And so you're still young in that age. I retired at 32, and then I'm going into a world where I haven't developed a skill set for life skills, right? Because I've kind of been coddled a little bit as a professional athlete, as a college athlete. And so you have to face all these battles by yourself. And then you're kind of trying to figure out who am I? And then you've reached the peak in what society thinks is the top of one field as a football or sports athlete. And then even when I made the transition into finance, right? Like I go from my salary, my minimum salary was $1 million my last year. And then I go into this world and it's $50,000, right? And so it's just the chat. And then, and so you try to deal with all of those things and you're taught to deal with those things by yourself, right? Like you don't usually have an outlet to talk to because who's going to feel bad for you when, oh man, you were an NFL player, you were the second pick. You're not supposed to have any problems. You financially secure, you got everything going right, right? But when you sit in them rooms by yourself and you're figuring out, okay, well, what do I do? What can I do? Who's going to help me in this transition? Who helps the helper is the question that I ask a lot of times to the people, because in those positions, you become the caretaker for majority of your family. And so when you're no longer in that position, who do you go to? Whether it's conversation or those phone calls stop, like nobody needs tickets anymore. Nobody wants to come to Miami to come for the weekend for the game. So a lot of times your value becomes, what you do or who you do it for. And then people don't even understand that part. And I think a lot of athletes, they think like, man, with relationships, like, oh man, you were just around me for those perks, right? You weren't really around for me because now those things go away. The relationship goes away. And it's only a few people that are there, through the other parts of that stuff. And I think mentally, a lot of guys kind of struggle with that part of it, especially when they're not financially secure and they didn't do the right thing with their money. Now, I think all of those things are just enhanced a little bit more.
Yeah. And I think there's so many layers and entangled webs, right? So the whole thing that I think people see, just like you say, like, oh, you're making all these millions of dollars. You were drafted here. You were pro. You were this. You were that. Like, how can you have any problems? You've seen success that I've never seen and may never see, right? And they forget about the part that you're a human being. You just happen to be living in a different part of life. So Bailey, I know you have a lot of experience with this. Do you want to?
I'm just literally like, it's hard for me to like ask Ronnie questions because I'm literally laughing over here at some of the stuff that he's saying because I was with him in that area. Like I was on Ronnie's sidelines. I was a Dolphin cheerleader while Ronnie played. So it was like, we did a lot of like activities and whatever together. So I'm laughing at like the people that used to call for tickets, like the turnover in the friend groups, because I'm familiar with what he's talking about, like even just for him on a personal level. The question I wanted though to ask you was, life after football for you, like what did that look like when you were done and you retired, like transitioning out of all of that routineness and just the workout schedule on top of it and like all the therapy that you had to do, and then now you're a civilian. Like what did that feel like for you?
It's some sense of being on an island because and I think a lot of times it's our own minds that get the best of us, because it's like, well, who do I go to? Who's going to understand what I'm going through? So you kind of isolate yourself a lot of times, right? Thinking that nobody will understand, or not embracing or tapping into those smaller circles that you do have that's going to support and not judge because you're having these issues. So the transition, that's one of the harder things that I've done, because one, you prepare to come into it, but you really don't prepare to leave it unless, you do, for the guys that do make a lot of money, but even still, it's like, well, what do I do with my day? I found myself, I was playing golf with a group of older gentlemen, right? They were in their 70s. And so, I'm 32 years old, 33 years old, spending 5-6 hours at the golf course. And then, I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm recently married. Like, I can't do this, right? Like that leads to, but I was trying to chase that idea of being in the locker room, right? Like being out of the house for a few hours.
Competition.
Trying to find that solace, right? And then I was tapping into competitive part because I was trying to master this golf game. And so that was a comfort zone. But the reality was, wait a minute, after a year and a half, I can't do this at 33, right? Like then I got kids now. And so just trying to find that comfort zone of that and creating a network. For me, I was lucky because I had a good group of guys in college that, there was 4 of us that got drafted in the first round that year. And so, my college roommate is my kid's godfather. And so he lives in Atlanta. So I still have that connection. My best friend who was also recruited, we met on our recruiting visit. He's the pastor now. He's also my pastor. And then he's also, someone that I confide in a lot. And he's been there through the thick and thin of it. And he's been through the thick and thin. And so having those circles has definitely helped me, but most guys don't, right? And so, you look at it and say, okay, well, what does this transition look like? I don't have, that comfort of being in the locker room. I don't have that structure. I don't have to be at, pretty much year round since I was 5 or 6 years old. I knew pretty much throughout the year where I was going to be, whether that's football, travel baseball, doing different things. And so through college and pros, I knew, okay, well, I get done this part of the season. I get a couple months for off season. I take a trip. I go to OTAs, rinse and repeat, right? And you do that for 10 years. It's like, okay, wait a minute. All that goes away all at once. And it's like, well, how do I recreate that? I don't have to get up at 4:30 like I was getting up at 5 o'clock. I don't have to be in a special team meeting by 7. I'm not going to be at the facility to 5 o'clock. I'm not going to watch film to 6 o'clock. And then I'm going to go get dinner. I'm going to sit around, watch a couple Martins, a couple shows, and then repeat that. Like, right? You lose all that structure. And it's like, well, how do I recreate that? Everybody's not disciplined, right? And we always hear, the saying of the idle mind is the devil's playground, right? And especially for guys who have been in those environments, right? Like it gets contagious. Like, being in Miami in your 20s and having money and being able to go out and go to dinner wherever you want to and do these things. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well now I'm a civilian. I'm not really spending as much. I done have fun, but my lifestyle's changed. Well, who is my new group, right? Like most people my age are still working and they're in the heights of their career. So how do I get close with a new group of people that just really want to know me for me and not, oh, because you were the running back for the Miami Dolphins or this team or that team. And so a lot of those things come to mind. That was a long-winded answer, I realized.
You are excellent at this, actually. I love your long-winded answers. Like, this is like different than how we used to conversate because we were in party mode back in the day. And so listening to your growth now, I'm super proud of you. Like, I'm just so impressed that like the whole time I'm listening to you answer, I'm like, have you ever considered doing any speaking for athletes that are going into the draft and whatnot? Because like just listening to you say who helps the helper, people prepare to come in, but they're not prepared to leave it. And like, it gave me that also with Misty's comments, that whole, what have you done for me lately is really what everybody's basically expecting when they're looking at your accolades, and you're only as good as your latest accolade. Like you sound like a speaker that could like really educate the new guys going in and giving them the tools and tips to like mentally get strong, like and ready for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've grown up a lot, Bailey. I think that's part of it. But then too, I think sometimes the greatest education is experience, right? And so going through it and being able to speak to it is a lot different, right? Like, and I've been through it myself. I've seen buddies and friends go through it. And so I can see it and walk through it from a different lens. And then even understanding too, like I empathize with these young guys because they're in a different world. And now I'm Unc, right? Like my hair is gray, so they all call me the old guy. And so trying to relate to those guys without scaring them is a big part of it, right? To say, I know my world isn't your world, but there are a lot of similarities, right? And there's importance in preparing yourself for this because the things that so many of these young guys don't realize, it's the professional sports, right? And it's the sports business, and they don't understand the business side of it. And so one of the things when I do talk to these young men, I'm like, hey, man, this is the sports business. So either you learn the business side of it or you become somebody else's business. And so many guys don't understand that aspect of it. And it's like, well, I got somebody to do that for me, right? And so then you get out and that transition happens, and then now you no longer have somebody to do that for you. Well, what do you do now, right? Now you're trying to figure it all out all at once when you got so many thoughts going through your head for so many of these guys. And, I've seen guys go through that. And so trying to coach them and teach them through that and say, hey, just preparing yourself, right? And making sure that you are aware that this is a business, and so everybody's situation is different. And so it allows me to do that from a different lens to say, I sat in that seat, but I also, can empathize with you because I understand the feeling when I was 22, 23 years old and I got drafted and I just didn't know what I didn't know, right? And you just typically don't.
Also, literally so in the beginning of our show, we typically ask this question of all of our guests, and I'd love to know what you feel like was your greatest mental health challenge that you faced, if you don't mind sharing with us throughout the journey.
Man, it's been few of them, right? Like coming from the environment, right? I think but my cousin moved in with me, and so having that safe space. But then he and I fell out because of the expectations of, well, what else? Like, what have you done for me lately? And people being in his ear in so many conversations. I tear my ACL, in my third year where I'm leading the league in rushing and all-purpose yards. Then I go sit down and I'm going to rehab and, thinking about, man, if this is it, like what's next? And then the phone stops ringing. You don't get the phone calls. Nobody checks in on you. You got to go to rehab. And so you're in a challenging mindset because you don't know. And so that was another part. And then, when I got out of football, my parents, like during COVID, I lost my mom. I lost my father in September due to cancer. So, having to take him off a ventilator over the phone was a little challenging. And then you also say 6 months later, I lost my mom to COVID. And so, that was unexpected. So, and that's the other thing, telling these young guys, like, money and finances don't change that stuff, right? Like those are relationships and you can't buy that stuff back. And so trying to get them to understand that, having good people around you is really important. And the team that you put together off the field is probably more important than you have on the team, because that's going to lead to your successes or your failures.
You just said a mouthful there, because I think that, first of all, I'm sorry that you went through that in such a short period of time. I mean, that had to be an incredible challenge. And I'm sure it still is in many ways a challenge. So thank you for sharing that. But, you're talking about, managing the money, and that relationships matter more, because like money cannot change any of those things. They cannot change adversity. They cannot change challenges. But I think that that's so important to remember, no matter where you sit, right? Because maybe not all of our listeners will play in the pros or have that level of financial success, if you will, right? And sometimes we lose track of that because we're so focused on the money and the finances, and that's like, you know what I mean? Like and I'm sure you see that a lot as a wealth advisor.
Yeah. And it's just, and that's the thing that I tell these young guys, even now, like in college, right? Like there's a false sense of security because you're getting this NIL. So everyone feels like the superstar because they were the superstar coming out of high school.
Right.
Well, because you're getting something, that doesn't increase the numbers. Like, right, we just had the NFL draft. It's still only 257 guys out of college getting drafted, right? And so there's thousands of guys in college. And so that doesn't guarantee you a position in the NFL. And so that false sense of security or, having all these yes men and people around you, it doesn't change some of the experiences that you're going to experience, right? You're still going to wake up. You're going to have bad days. You're not going to want to go to practice. There were mornings I woke up on Monday mornings after Sunday games. I was like, man, do I really want to do this? Like my body felt the way that it did. But I think that just getting them to realize you're not above the BS just because you are famous or you make a lot of money. Things in life are still going to happen. You're going to deal with adversities. And so having people around you that you can relate to or confide in or just share stuff with, it's going to be important. And a lot of times we don't think that because we're in a society where it says, well, if you're financially secure and you're famous, man, you don't have any problems, right? Because that's the idea of social media, right? You never, social media is everybody's highlight tape, right? You get to see everybody's highlight tape. It's rare that people show the bad plays in their life. And so you just kind of got to realize that, and it is what it is.
I love that you shared that, by the way, because I was listening to your episode with Edge on his Create the Life podcast. And you were talking about that a little bit. You were talking about the podcast, like, I mean, how social media, you have to be able to discern the good from the bad on there. Like social media isn't bad, but you have to be able to really decide what you're looking at And so how would you advise somebody, like maybe even your kids, like how do you, when you're on those social media platforms, how do you do that?
Well, I think it's just the reality that everybody who follows you is not your friend. And everybody don't want to see you do well, right? Like you got people on there that, we got people around us that we see them on social media like, man, hold on, wait a minute. They living like that? Like that ain't the same person I know. And so just looking at the idea, and I teach my kids that, everyone on your side or by your side is not on your side, right? And so just because you got a lot of followers, there are some people just looking to see how they can bring you down, right? And so
Right.
that's the reality of, you got people, there's people that like you, there's people that don't, right? There are people that you can encourage to like you by what they're viewing, but everybody's not your friend. And so just the reality, don't get your love and foundation built on likes and, fake support, right? Like, cause you just don't know. That ain't really the reality. One of these people, you don't even have a name for. They're behind memes or, certain things. And so having a self-worth, having self-value and understanding your value as a person and being comfortable to take you and your authentic self into any environment is really important.
What's some of the tools you use to help you with your mental health? Like, and like, do you pass those on to your kids,
Yeah, we have a lot of conversations. So I get to do drop off in the mornings, right? And so, we talk about value, right? And morals and principles and standards, right? Your standard is your standard, right? And so it's really important for them to know who they are, right? And so we talk about that a lot. And not being afraid to try stuff, to try new stuff. Like my son and I, we just having a conversation. He plays the trumpet in the band. And, he's a big time athlete, but I'm like, you make the things that you do cool, right? Like, don't allow somebody to define what you think is cool. My daughter the same way, right? She's a little bit more emotional, and cares what people think, but, trying to get her to understand, that it's okay to communicate, like, and especially with me and mom, like talk to us about anything. And I'm always on your side until we not. When we get home, we can talk about it. But in the process, I'm going to be on your side and I'm going to support you. For me, my escapes, I golf sometimes when I can. I got a couple guys that I talk to that we have real authentic conversation, right? Like my biggest thing is having people around me that can tell me how they really feel, right? And that's rare in this world. And so, we have disagreements, but that's how you can determine how close your relationship is if you've had disagreements and how many you've had.
Right.
And that sentiment doesn't change, right? And I got a small group of guys that, we done probably got into it and thought we weren't friends, but they were giving me the authentic self and I was doing the same. And I felt like I could be me. And they'd tell me when I was wrong. So, that's cool. And then just, I'm still open to it. Like, right. I'm still developing in that area because I believe we all have traumas and things and we were shaped and molded by our experiences growing up. Right. Like, so we all got things that, we're trying to overcome or, are creating new normals.
It's so cool to hear you say, like, because I was just telling somebody, I can't remember who I was telling, but I was just telling them it's so funny, like the difference between like men and women sometimes, like, for like men, you guys like just like, hey, I'll be back, and you waltz out the house. And for us, I feel like we always have to be like, hey, will you be home? Can I leave the kids here? I need to run to the store, right? Like very different. And I love the fact that you said I get to do drop.
I picked up on that too. I was like, I loved that.
I was in the back here like, that's it. Like, let's do this. I get to pick, you know what I mean? It's great quality time with your kid when you got like, I have a 45-minute drop off, and if a return like pickup is an hour and a half. And I really started using that time in the car to like, how much can I pour into this kid? Because I feel like you sound now, Ronnie, like so different, learned from so many experiences. How much more can I give them in this drive time to just get them a little more ahead and more fed and more tools in their toolbox? So
I do the same thing. It's funny how when we were growing up, that really wasn't what was talked about in the car with your parents back then, right? I'm 56 years old now. I'm talking about when I was in high school. We didn't have social media. We didn't have all the technology stuff for me. So our parents didn't really talk about, all my mom really talked about was don't do drugs, right? Don't fall into drugs. Now the conversation is so deep. Like the things I talk to my kids about, the things I talk to especially my son about, the realities of life and social media and therapy and accepting therapy. I mean, this is kids in high school, and we talk about suicide and mental health, and we talk about his friends, and we talk, it's just, the internet is just so different, the conversations that I give him than what was given to me. It's just, I just think it's just a very different time.
Well, Ronnie's also like, Ronnie, how old are you now? Like, you're a totally different generation.
He was born in 81, just like me.
Yeah. Well, too, I think for me too, the thing that changed that perspective a little bit was when I lost my parents unexpectedly, right? I used to say I have to, right? Or, and then shifting that to say, wait a minute, like, I get to do these things, because I'm sure there's some people that wish they had the opportunities, right? And so learning to appreciate those things, and, I'm more careful about, my verbiage and speaking things into life and understanding the power of words, and just being around kids and hearing how they communicate. That's kind of opened me up to saying, okay, this is how they view it. And they listen to everything, right? And so I also want to shape how they think about themselves and how they think about other things.
And they got their own opinions.
Right. And so it's really important. So I try to be intentional with saying, I get to do these things. You get to do these things because, even the hard things that you rather not want to do, I'm sure somebody trades spaces with you at any time. So.
Oh yeah.
And you make the things that you do cool. That is such a good sense to share with teens, like any of our teens in the audience. Like, you just have to know that you make the things that you do cool. Like, they don't have to be cool because some other kid did them. They can be cool because you're doing them. And so I love that you talked like that to your kids. And I think that's something at Kennedy Kids Foundation we could share with teens, or like put on a t-shirt, that big deal. So
yeah.
Yeah, that's something I taught with my kid also, because he has his friends and they will say to him, that's not cool. And I always say, hey, that's their perspective. Yeah. It's cool to you and it's cool to me.
Right.
And you can make it cool to others, but just because they say it's not cool doesn't mean that you have to then stop doing it, right? Because then somebody else is not controlling your emotions and your mental health at that point, right? So, again, it's not only the kids that are within arm's reach, but they got the whole internet that's telling them that's not cool, and people who are influencers that saying this is cool when in my mind I'm like, that ain't really cool, so it's so much going on. And how do you deal with all that, Ronnie, with your kids now? Internet, are you a guy that allows them to be on the internet and social media all day? Are you strict? What kind of parent are you?
Yeah, I mean, we monitor it, right? Like, they are involved because it's such a way of their world, right? And I don't want to be that dinosaur to say, oh, we didn't have computers, y'all don't do that, right? Like, so, homework comes home on the iPad, everything's through Google Classroom. So that's the norm for them. And so just trying to teach them how to manage that stuff, and not get validated by what they read or what they see or what somebody says. Like we saying, it's like, that's not cool. Well, maybe they're not confident enough to do it. So maybe they're more afraid to do it, and maybe they just don't have the confidence in themselves to go do it. And so think for yourself, and that's why I talk to them about leadership, right? Like, leaders think for themselves. Don't allow somebody else to tell you what you think about something. And just having the conversation, right? And like you said, the most important thing is allowing them to have their own opinion, right? And then we have feedback, we have conversation about it, and then allow them to form their own thoughts around it.
Amazing. Well, I get to ask you the last question of the day, Ronnie, and we want to stay in keeping with your timeline for this podcast. So what are 3 things that you would like to share with our listeners that positively improve your mental health?
One, I think taking time for yourself. You know, not allowing other things or other people to interrupt your peace. Like you can't pour from an empty cup, right? Like so, you have to take time for self. Number two is having a support system that you communicate with, and then not being afraid to escape, which is my biggest one that I'm still trying to work on. Taking time for yourself outside of that, right? Like, whether it's trips or just a day trip, go stay in a hotel by yourself, to escape life or whatever it is when you
Why is
feel
that hard for you?
overwhelmed.
Why is that hard for you? Ronnie, why is that hard for you? Do you feel the responsibility of a father or work or your husband? Why is that hard for you?
All of that. And I feel like, I guess growing up the way that I did, I know what it feels like to not have. And so I overcompensate sometimes for my kids and do stuff that I probably shouldn't. But then it's just I have a fear of failure that I'm still trying to overcome. And I want to.
Do you think that was put in you by a coach? Do you think a coach put that in you in Little League? Because I know my coaches put that in me. Definitely.
Probably. I had a baseball coach. He made us wash our cleats before baseball games. And so even now, like I keep my closet together. Like, and I knew we were going to play in red dirt, but he was just like, it's about the little things, right? And so, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so a lot of those things stick with me.
Yeah.
Well, we love that, Ronnie. We thank you so much for being on our show today. Everyone, just remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you should take time to escape and take care of yourself. So if you or a loved one is in need of assistance, please dial 988, the Suicide Crisis Hotline. If you would like some additional resources, please feel free to visit the KennedyKids.org website. We would love to hear from you, and we look forward to you listening to us on our next show. Thank you again, Ronnie.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Ronnie, where can people reach you? Where can people reach you if they need financial,
social
assistance?
media?
Social media, what's your
handle?
Yeah, they can get in touch with y'all. Y'all can get in touch with me. So I'm available. As Dion says, I ain't hard to find.
Ronnie Brown.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ronnie.
Thank you, Ronnie.